Hello, sister. Thank you so much for hanging out and spending time with me today. How are you?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Yeah, happy to be here and dive in. I'll start with just introducing myself in my native language. Halmashke, Angelica Trimble-Yanu, I always mess up this. Imachi api kisto, Oglála Hamacha. That translates to hello, friends and relatives. My name is Angelica Trimble-Yanu. And yeah, that's usually how I like to introduce myself.
Oh,
I'm
thank you for,
a lot better at that introduction, but
yeah, well, way better than what I have done. I have tried, and I was like, I think I'll let the artist speak for herself.
yes, yeah.
Yes.
Still
Well,
learning the language, so it's yeah, it's a learning process.
oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I met you, you were living in Oakland, but you are from South Dakota and then made your way out to Oakland.
Yeah, I actually had quite an interesting upbringing. So I spent most of my time, like I was born in Berkeley and raised in Oakland. But as like a young child, my sister and I spent a lot of time between Oakland and then also visiting South Dakota when we were like very tiny. I think I was like an infant. And this was because my birth father is from South Dakota, from Pine
Mhm.
Ridge. And then my birth mother, grew up in Berkeley and Oakland. And so we kind of shuttled between the two places very young. And then my sister and I actually went through a adoption process. So I am adopted. I was raised by my maternal aunt, so on my mother's side, and my grandmother. And yeah, my sister and I were primarily raised in Oakland in the Bay Area, by our mother's side of the family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so didn't spend much time with my birth parents. I am estranged from my birth mother, and my father passed away in 2014. So we didn't have a super close relationship until after his passing. I
Oh,
was able to sort of reconnect to him through my art, because he represents the Oglála Lakota side of my family. Um,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that was very deep. I'm also estranged from my mother, so I can relate very
Yeah.
closely, very
Family
closely.
is complex for
Isn't
sure.
it? Yes. All these complexities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, when I started looking at your work, I immediately was drawn in and became very curious. And of course, I'm like, what is this title name? You have amazing titles. Just some of them are Black Sun, A Voice of an Insect. I've written down a few, Let the Light In. But can you tell us some of your process about how you start naming your work, and then we can talk about your process. But just
Mhm.
as to allow people to get more of your systemologies from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I take titling really seriously. I My sister and I actually collaborated on some of my earlier titling. Specifically Voice of an Insect and Look to See What the Light Lets In is also um, derived from her poetry work, from her writing. So I became really interested early on in my practice. A lot of my research was poetry, trying to learn more about Native poets and contemporary poets. And my sister at the time was also writing, and I asked her if I, could, read some of her work and utilize some of it for titling. So Voice Like an Insect, Look to See What the Light Lets In are all, pieces from her work. So a lot of my work is collaborative, whether that's with family or landscape.
Mhm.
But I really wanted to find a way, I guess, to tie language to my visual work as well, because I think that's super important. And a lot of like our oral traditions are, they're passed down orally, like through storytelling and like through poetry. And so that means of passing became really interesting to me. So I thought, hey, why not, reach out to my sister and kind of replicate that passing of stories like through between her and I. So it became sort of this conversation between us. And yeah, I think that her work is extremely strong, and she has a really beautiful way of talking about place and, these fragmented ways that are, yeah, just really stunning to me. Um, and yeah, she just has such a strange way with words in the best way possible. And yeah, so that's kind of the genesis of my titling came from working with her.
Yeah. Is she a younger sister or older?
She's older by 3 years.
Okay. God, that
Yeah.
magic number 3. If
Mhm.
anybody's into numerology or numbers, that's the number of creativity in my
Yeah.
research. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but
Yeah.
it would make sense.
Ah, and you're right. I'm glad that she realizes that she's a poet, because it is very poetic
Mhm.
and definitely ties, you kind of understand what the narrative's going to be from
Mhm.
them pretty
Yeah.
directly.
Yeah.
So in your visual work, what are some of your systemologies that you're using, your parameters to stay focused while you're creating?
Yeah. I've built sort of a system for myself over the years. Starting in 2018, I became more of a printmaker, I think, that year. And I was doing printmaking prior to that, but I became more of like a focused printmaker, and I created, these boundaries for myself. So for example, my work is all coded in 4 colors, and the 4 sacred colors of the Lakota, and often seen in many medicine wheels across a lot of indigenous cultures. But I specifically, growing up, a lot of our stories, were told through color and shape and animal and form. And I became really interested in utilizing like my ancestors' way of talking about the world, like through color. So using specifically red, I was raised to believe that red was like the color of our ancestors. So it's a color that our ancestors are really drawn to. And red is commonly used in a lot of our dance regalia, beadwork as well. So it's this sort of symbol of power and symbol of being able to call to our ancestors, I guess.
Yeah, the call. I love it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think, working in just these 4 colors, I'm paying homage to my ancestors and, their creative endeavors earlier on. So I think that utilizing a language that they formed, I'm able to like bring forth those stories into a contemporary setting. And this became really important to me, I think, more later on when I was learning more about sort of the political history too of my people, of the Lakota, and sort of what we had to go through to be here today. And I learned very quickly that, it was illegal for us to create and to have ceremony and to speak our native language, like well into like the 70s, so there's this sort of dampening of our language that was, or this attempt to dampen, our relationship to our language and to our ancestry. And I felt like there was nothing stronger than utilizing, this visual language coded through color and shape to, work within those parameters. I felt like there was a very strong sort of offering that I was giving to my ancestors. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
definitely coded in, the political history or ceremony. Yeah, everything's very intertwined in my work. So,
Absolutely. And then another one is site specific. So you're going, placing land into your work and your creativity and calling your ancestors into this site specific work. And so with those, can you talk a little bit more about that process? As much as you feel comfortable, because you have said before very publicly that you're not announcing exactly, you're not giving us a pin on these logistic geographies, but
yeah,
they are sacred, because they are sacred.
yeah, exactly. I think I, was taught to respect, our history in just certain ways, whether it's choosing what to show and what not to show and all of that stuff. So I have been very careful in the past and now to only talk about what I feel comfortable with. So I appreciate you bringing that up because that is a part of my practice. And that's why I approach my work so abstractly as well, just because it is important to keepsake and protect, our values and our ceremonies. But my site-specific work started in 2018, and it was part of my undergrad, my thesis dissertation. My plan was to go out to South Dakota in 2018 for the first time because I hadn't been back since I, was a tiny child and before my adoption and all of that. And so I felt, the strong need to go back to South Dakota and reconnect with my family, visit my father's grave, do all of those things. But then I thought, like, why not make this, into also part of my thesis project? So what I did is I took like a stack of prints, monotype prints, which is the form that all my sculptures start in, is in a monotype. Yeah. And so I just took them out there with me for a couple weeks and sculpted in specific sites in South Dakota as I was traveling, as I was meeting family and cousins and reconnecting to that landscape. So that's kind of like where it all started to kind of come together for me. I realized that a lot of, my black and white prints, they actually reflected our Haisapa, our Black Hills, and sort of these sacred mountain ranges. And, before then, people had told me like, okay, your work looks very geological. There's strata, I see mountains, I see a lot of different natural phenomena happening. And I always was like, okay, yeah, that's awesome that that's there. But I didn't really realize the significance of that until I was in South Dakota in those landscapes, completely embedded in them with my prints, that I was able to see that seamless connection between my mark making and our sacred mountainscapes.
I just am having an epiphany as you're talking. I'm so happy for you that you got to have that connection.
Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. And to kind of backtrack a little bit, before I had gone out there, I had really loved printmaking, and I knew that there was something about it that I was drawn to, and I just became really obsessed with like making these marks, but I didn't really realize like why or what the reasoning was until I was out there. So I will note that before I even went out there, I was very obsessed with this mark making and this process, and without quite fully understanding conceptually why. So I think Iesca, that site-specific project, really solidified that connection for me. And being able to return to my homelands and also give an offering to those spaces versus me going back there and being like, oh, where, this is where I came from. I felt like it was also important to me to give an offering like to those spaces.
Yeah.
Good way to return. And as a Lakota, like we always talk about like the good way to do things. And there's, we have a lot of codes of values for us. And a lot of it is like paying homage and respect to our landscapes and to our ancestors. So the site-specific sculptural process also became a ceremonial like offering as well. And yeah, I think there's something really powerful happening there.
I think so. I mean, I think so because I've seen your creations and expression that has come from that movement that you've done and that offering. And as you're telling me about it right now, I'm getting emotional. So I feel you. I feel what you did. And so I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot because I think being adopted and being somewhat displaced, from that side of my family, and also being biracial, I am half white and half Lakota. And so I think as a young kid, I was really struggling with, finding my identity or
Sure.
being comfortable with claiming my heritage. And art really helped me reconnect and reclaim, I think, in a lot of ways. And I mean, I to this day believe it was like my father that, sort of led me, to art as a way of healing and processing his passing and, his absence from my life. And so I think that, yeah, there's a lot of like spiritual, really intense things that led me to where I'm at today. But I will say art was definitely a means of healing for me.
Yeah.
So the site-specific work for me, it definitely works larger than just being art or just being this way of telling my connection to land. Like it's become a mode of like healing and reconnecting and
Yeah.
understanding too, and returning back to South Dakota after being raised in a city primarily, South Dakota. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever been out there, but it's plains and there are some mountains, but Pine Ridge Reservation specifically is one of the poorest reservations in the country. And so, returning there and also having to recognize my own privilege as well, like not being raised there, there was a lot of healing and processing that had to happen. But I think returning there and seeing where my dad grew up and conditions that he grew up in also allowed me to forgive him as well for the things that he struggled with. And so I think that
It
is
it
healing.
really healing and gave you a greater sense of some empathy and being able to see and experience what his conditions were.
Exactly. Yeah. I spent a lot of my earlier years feeling really angry, and then, now having this experience through my art, through the travel back there and all of that, there's a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah, there's a lot of a friend of mine had coined the term wounds to wisdom, and it just seems like that was a path that
Absolutely.
you were so open to receive too,
Yeah.
to hear that.
Yeah, it's so hard to, not talk about all these deeper relations and experiences when I talk about my art, because they're all just so deeply intertwined. So I appreciate you, being so open to receiving, some of these deeper thought processes and background story, because I know that it's definitely intense, but also really critical to understanding my work.
Yes, that's why I love helping artists tell their story from their voice, directly from them. Your color, so you've got form and color and site-specific systemologies, because your color is also intense. But really, what I wanted to share is that through all of this reckoning that you're doing, your work is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a really interesting thing to point out. And I often get told that, you know, my work visually, there's a beauty, there's a grace to it, as well as an intensity. And so there is this balance that I'm striking. And I don't even think purposely, like it's not cognitive, you know, like I'm not consciously, you know, thinking about striking that balance, but I think it's just the nature of who I am and my experiences, and also just the nature of being Lakota. Um, like a lot of our experiences are so beautiful, and there's such a celebration of life on Pine Ridge too. And I want to also highlight that as well. Like, even though I mentioned, you know, the poverty and sort of the struggles of that reservation, I will say, like, anytime I'm back there, the biggest thing I see is, you know, the celebration of life, of our ancestries and our traditions. And I think that's literally one of the reasons why we're still here as Lakota people, is that we've held on to these beautiful traditions, even through the hardships that we've experienced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Moment to that. Well, I'm apparently, you know, there's lots of people that agree with the beauty in your work, that it is striking. There is tension. That's another reason why I love it, because I recognize a little bit of tension. But you've worked on some large projects and some large companies. So
Yeah.
like Google, can you want to share a little bit about that project?
Yeah, that was one of the most rewarding and difficult projects. It was the first time that I have ever scaled my work up to 107 square feet. So, you know, just technically that process was really, really interesting. And yeah, I guess from the beginning, Google approached me specifically because my work, you know, kind of circles around these ideas of land and tradition and ancestry, but also, you know, there's a sense of sustainability threaded throughout my work as well, because in my technical process as a printmaker, I use recycled material to make my marks with. So I actually go to like frame shops and I go through their mat board and take a bunch of their, you know, scraps of mat board that they don't need. And that's actually how I'm drawing those very intricate lines that you see in my work. So I do use some materials that are reused, and I think, you know, they were kind of interested in that process. But I think also, yeah, they built the Google store all off of like recycled material, which is really cool. And they were also paying attention to like the local ecology around there. And yeah, it was just a very they were very conscious about what materials they were using. And I think they wanted to work with an artist that sort of had that same awareness around land that they were kind of having with building the store. So I think that was part of it. It was that they liked my process as an artist. And yeah, I mean, throughout the whole process, it was definitely good. There was definitely a lot of moments where I was having to learn new things. We ended up having to use some machine learning and upscaling my work. So we were using Topaz, Gigapixel AI. So there was a moment of using AI in my art, which I hadn't, you know, previously really thought about consciously. So that had me, you know, thinking more about how I'm collaborating with AI and technology in my work, and what does that mean for my work. And so I think it opened up a lot of new like doors for myself as an artist, and just, you know, questioning AI. And that's like, it's definitely something that a lot of artists and designers and humanity as a whole is questioning, you know, this emergence of AI. So it was really interesting that I had to bring in an AI to help me like upscale my work for the Google store. So that, yeah, that was really an interesting experience.
I'm glad you had that opportunity to go large, because as women and as women artists specifically, you know, we're always told be smaller, cross your legs, be tight. And when you're creating art, I've seen so many women doing the same thing, just saying, you know, inside some boundaries. And yeah, the Google wall is huge. And you can really like you can dive into that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it, you know, I also was really surprised that they were giving me so much space. So I think that says a lot, you know, as being a female artist too.
It does. It does.
And then learning that, you know, it was my work that was going to be in the Google store, kind of the concentration of the art was mine in the store, which I previously hadn't, you know, even thought about. I was like, oh, they're, you know, and they hired other artists to do different areas of, you know, the campus too. So it was cool working alongside other artists. But I didn't realize that my work would be so large in that space. And for the flagship Google store, I mean, it's their first flagship store, which is incredible, like on the West Coast. So that was a huge undertaking for me, which we're very happy I had the opportunity.
Me too. Me too. And I've been sharing it with folks, and I hope it does spur some other larger actions for you, because it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. You know what else is beautiful is I'm looking at your beautiful neckline, and you have this star right on your throat. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So this star is a very common motif, I guess, in Lakota imagery. So we call ourselves the Star Nation. We believe that we emerged from the stars. And so this symbol is seen on a lot of our quilts, like our star quilt, which is used in a lot of ceremonies. And it's just a significant, I guess, a significant shape and symbol. I got it because I feel proud of where I come from, and I wanted something to signify that. And then I thought, you know, in terms of the placement, it's right on my throat, like quite literally on my throat. And this is sort of where you speak from. So it's also a reminder for myself to, you know, keep speaking Lakota, keep learning it for one, because it is a language that a lot of our elders are, you know, getting older, and there aren't a lot of resources in learning it. So this was sort of, you know, there's a few different reasons why, but this was one of the main reasons why I got this on my throat, as a reminder to keep speaking our native language and to celebrate who I am.
That is beautiful. And yes, you are a star. Yes, I see you. You're beautiful. Yeah.
Appreciate
So, as we kind of weighing down here, where should we have folks take a look at you? Instagram or your website?
Yeah, I think I keep up with both, but I think my Instagram is definitely most active, and maybe more fun to look at. So yeah, I usually direct people to my Instagram, and then my website is also linked on my Instagram. So it's easy to navigate through from there. But yeah, my Instagram is at Angelica Yanu. So
Okay. Right. And I'll make sure that that's written in the show notes too. So I'll make sure to get people there too. Well, thank you so much for hanging out and telling us more about your work, and definitely more about you. You're very inspirational.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like most of that was about me and my upbringing, but you know, that is, you know, it's important to my art practice as well. So thank you for giving me the space.
You're welcome. See you soon.
Okay.